1:30 and I'm still on this screen,
Yeah.
which says it's
Mulai aja kali.
Should we start, Pak Yose?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, I guess.
It will be okay. I think we need to wait a couple more minutes, I guess. Okay, so I think we can start this session now. Very good afternoon, friends and colleagues. Thank you for joining again in our session. Before we start our panel, let me introduce myself. My name is Teguh Yudo from Mandiri Institute, Bank Mandiri Indonesia. And we are going to, discuss about this policy brief that is written by our friends from T20. So, and I'm very honored to chair and to moderate this session. Before we discuss deeper about the current policy brief, let me give briefly a little bit about context of for our discussion. So in the morning, we had really exciting and thought-provoking discussion about reforming or reorienting international financial institutions. We know that in the past couple years, we have encountered entirely different problems and challenges. Even those problems, come one after one and challenge our ability to solve. So I think it's clear that we have pressing issues related to dynamic changes. And if we look at the global risk report on the World Economic Forum, we get a sense about the critical risk that will be faced in the next 2 or 3 years. And on top of that is the cost of living. And I think this is what we had discussed today as well in the morning. So if we look at or if we hear today's discussion, it seems that the most vulnerable groups of society and already fragile countries will be most severely affected, which will exacerbate poverty, starvation, political instability, and also possibly state collapse. Meanwhile, the gains earned by middle-class households will also be undermined by economic pressures, political divisions, and also requests for more social protections. And I think this again echoes what we discussed yesterday and today about the need for having a greater social safety net. Now, if we reflect with the current structure and operational models of international financial institutions, we may say that they seem to be less agile in responding swiftly crisis. And this is the first challenge that we face. With the recent dynamics, I think we will need more adaptive and agile international financial institutions and also MDBs. And the second challenge I'd like to raise here is how we enhance funding mobilization for development agenda. And I think this is also discussed in this morning. This is also critical issues given that we have a commitment to achieve SDGs by 2030, and some numbers, to achieve those goals, certain financing requirements should be mobilized. Some estimates suggest that around like 2 or 3 trillion annually. And with this COVID-19, we will need another 2 trillion annually to achieve our SDGs goal. So from development agenda and also climate change, I think it's clear that we need IFIs that more promote innovative financing tools and come up with a roadmap to expand them. Now, lastly, that I'd like to raise before we start our discussion is about the debt and credit ratings. And again, this is discussed this morning. One area that I think about these credit ratings for countries should be global public goods in which international financial institution and MDBs can contribute as well. So for instance, issues, like countries from the global south will need perhaps a new credit rating system, or using Jeffrey Sachs' idea is that credit rating system that is based on long-term debt sustainability and growth prospect for each country. Now, together with us, we have Yose Rizal Damuri from the Center for Strategic and International Studies who is going to present policy brief. So without much further ado, I would like to invite Yose to present his policy brief, and then we are going to invite John and also Sandra as our panelists. Thank you. Floor is yours, Yose, please.
Thank you, Yudo. A very good afternoon to all of you, colleagues and friends, John, Sandra, and also others who are participating in our afternoon session here. My name is Yose Rizal Damuri. I'm from the CSIS Indonesia, Center for Strategic and International Studies. As Yudo already mentions, that I'm going to present a policy brief, actually, that written with several colleagues under the Think 20. Let me share my presentations actually for this afternoon. I hope you can see the presentations already. Now, so there are 4 of us, the authors of policy brief on the issue of international financial institution reforms that we call Reorienting International Financial Institution and meeting the emerging development financing challenge. And this is a policy brief written by my colleague from the Research Information System for Developing Countries, Dr. Priyadarshi Das and Dr. Arun S. Nair, and also my colleague from CSIS Jakarta, Dandi Rafitrandi. It's basically trying to look at what we need to pursue or to proceed with the international financial institution reforms. Yudo already gave the context of it, and then basically what I'm trying to present here actually already mentioned by Yudo, and how the IFI or and also the MDBs need to change their orientations, need to be more accommodative in order to respond properly to the challenge that we are facing at the moment. I'm sorry. So this policy brief, as I mentioned before, try to look at is part of the Task Force 5 under the T20 India. We submit as part of the T20 activities, T20 process, in order to promote or in order to support the reforms of the international financial institution. But if we're talking about reforms of international financial institution, it's really not a new idea. In the 2008, for example, during the first G20 leaders meeting, leaders from all over the world already raised the issue of having a new international financial architecture, including also having what they call a new Bretton Woods system, Bretton Woods or Bretton Woods 2.0, and this and the agenda of advancing reform of international financial institutions has been discussed even prior to that summit or that leaders meeting, but after 15 years, we still quite as remote as we were in the early days of G20, although G20 itself already tried to promote or try to push for the reform of international financial institution. Like for example, in the under the G20 presidency of Saudi Arabia, the G20 was asked the IMF to conduct the analysis of external financing requirement in low-income developing nations and explore sustainable financial options. There was also several similar tasks to the World Bank Group and to several other international financial institutions. Even earlier in Japan, there were also some kind of discussions on how to improve the effectiveness of multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. The last year's Indonesia's presidency also reiterated G20's commitment to maintain a strong global financial safety net, and also to call for some kind of improvements in the effectiveness of those financial institutions, and there have been some follow-up on the G20's rules, although perhaps it's still very far away from the demands that we need. Some of the follow-up include also the increasing the capacity of some international financial institutions. And also implementing some recommendations and enhancing some contributions on the multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. So some areas have been discussed quite a lot, and many of them are already quite elaborated, and then our discussions for the last 2 days in our workshop, the T20 side events of TF5 also touch upon various issues related to the reforms of these international financial institutions. Our policy brief actually tried to look at several issues here. We realize that there are various issues that need to be done, need to be addressed under the reforms of IFIs, but we're trying to focus on several issues that we deem to be quite important. The first one is on the structure structural and operational issues of the international financial systems. The second one is on the growing demand for financings and also the access of and affordability of financing the international financing and international and development financing. Let me briefly elaborate on those three issues on how the challenges actually have been around for quite a while and really requires some appropriate solutions or some appropriate change in the way that the IFI carry out their operation. Some of them are related to the structural and operational issues, such as the needs for them, the dominance of wealthy countries within the Bretton Woods systems, and also how the decisions favor or tend to cater more for the interests of the developed countries, and somehow set aside the interests of less developed countries, and there are also some issues with the infrastructure and development financings and the way that those international financial institutions operate in disbursing their financing facilities. So in the end, it is very crucial to establish a more inclusive decision-making process in the international financial institutions such as IMF and World Bank and other international financial working group to allow more participations and representations of the developing nations and including also less developed worlds. The second one, we also know that there is a very a growing need for financing requirements, and this is quite obvious. We saw that the current challenges, such as the pandemic that we faced during the last 2 years, have bring a lot of issues that might not exist previously. We see that the COVID-19 bring us the scaring effect on poverty, on the gender issues as well, on education, and many other things that requires more actions need to be taken, and in order to have those actions, we really need more international financing. And of course, it's just one of the issues that we're facing. Currently, we are also facing the issue of climate and the loss of biodiversity that we need to address properly. And there is a big challenge in trying to fill the financing gap to respond to all of these issues. And the current capacity and the current systems for the international financial institutions do not allow much for them to contribute to that actions and activities, and it affects a lot to the developing and less developed worlds, because they are also facing a limited fiscal space due to the growing debt burdens during the pandemic era. So again, financial support is very crucial for the time being, and also in the future in response to the challenge appropriately. The third issue is also on the accessibility of financing, international financing, especially from the international financial institution, because many debt and credit rating many debts and loans are still very pretty much related to the credit ratings, and most of the developing countries, as well as less developed countries, have been in a very difficult situations with regard to the credit ratings, especially during the pandemic, where they need to utilize or need to use a lot of debt and loan from various issues. So accessibility and affordability would be crucial for
and developing countries must effectively harness their
I think there is a leak here.
macroeconomic stability. And we think that in this context,
sorry,
admin,
as it includes countries with
can you
investor.
I don't have, because
the
I'm
problem?
There is also a need to focus on
Yes, could the committee help me to turn off mute
private investment. So the discussion on the G20 table would be very important.
Perhaps you should mute yourself.
Developing countries. And also the G20 can also approach developing countries.
You help me.
Yes.
Which include promotes domestic saving, domestic investment,
exploration. Okay. Let me move to the recommendations to G20 that we are trying to propose to G20 in our policy brief. Well, we do have at least at the moment 4 recommendations to the multilateral development bank and international financial institutions that might need support from G20. The first one is on how to expedite the IFI reforms and their functioning beyond business as usual. There are several issues that we need that the G20 need to push in order to expedite the IFI reforms. The first one, of course, is strengthening the capital base of IFIs. Our chair, Yudo, also already mentions about it. It is crucial to enhance the capital base of IFIs, so that to enable them to leverage even more and increase capital, increase the spending that they can use to support developments in developing countries and less developed countries. It is very crucial, considering that the amount of money, the amount of financings we need to prevent all of these challenges are remarkable. Even for the climate financings itself, it is estimated that the developing and less developed countries require more than $2 trillion every year. While the World Bank, for example, only managed to spend or to disburse around 100 billion US dollar to support all kind of developments that most countries need at the moment. So there is a big gap on that, and without having this stronger capital base of the IFIs, maybe the international financial institutions could not really function well. And another thing is also improving participation of developing and less developed countries. This is also should be a priority agenda that G20 need to push, because of I think developing worlds also need better representation in determining the directions of IFIs activities and its contributions. Another maybe a minor suggestion is on the expansions of the research functions by MDBs in order for those MDBs have a good directions for better directions for their contributions. Another recommendations that G20 needs to pursue, I think, to decouple the lending decision from sovereign ratings. We know that currently many less developed and developing countries are in problems with their debt, and the ratings basically add another layer of problems, since it becomes the basis for evaluations of the loan disbursements. So decoupling of the lending decisions under the IFIs from this kind of ratings might be needed, or perhaps also to invent a new way of rating, new mechanisms of sovereign ratings that can be used more easily, and then cater the needs of the less developed countries. The third recommendations that G20 needs to promote, I think, to encourage more innovative financing tools and mobilizing more private capitals into the multilateral development banks, as well as also other international financial institutions. The G20 should promote this kind of innovative financing approach and develop a roadmap for their expansions. Some of the innovative schemes perhaps can be promoted and can be prioritized, such as the use of green bonds to finance environmentally friendly infrastructure, and to encourage more public-private partnership, including also the use of blended finance, and to set up several infrastructure investment funds that allow pooling resources for variety of investors to finance infrastructure projects. Those kind of innovative schemes need to be. We need to have more innovative stream and mechanisms in various international financial institutions to allow them to function more effectively. The fourth recommendations that perhaps G20 needs to do is also to encourage a greater regional perspective. We know that currently the most of the infrastructure and development financing are attached to a specific country, but we need to have a greater regional approach in loan disbursements or in the financing disbursement, because we know that cross-border and regional infrastructures becomes more important to response to the current situation, to the current challenges. Even if it is infrastructure and development that we need can be done within the border, the impact of that development project can be also spread across the regions and even globally. So this kind of regional perspective need to be encouraged by and it need to be done more effectively by the international financial institutions, and G20 should be there to promote this kind of changing. That's what we try to propose to the G20 in order to make the functions of IFI, the functionings of IFI. But what should a G20 do to support this kind of reforms? And then one of the things that the G20 might carry out is to come up with a common framework on the reforms of IFIs. There are many agendas actually that have been around for quite a while in how to carry out the reforms, but the G20 itself do not really have a common framework, the agreed directions, the consented directions for the reforms to take place. This framework should be built from a common understanding on the need for the reform and commitment to carry the reform. And G20 under this common framework could also set some kind of some long-term as well as interim objective of the reforms that might allow the initiative to take place and to proceed in under several stages, so that it gives a good directions on how the reforms could be carried out. That could start from the common interests and aspirations from all G20 members, while taking into account the interests of the rest of the world. And in order to do that, I think the middle, I call it middle economies, maybe more concretely, it's a non-G7 members of G20 countries. They should take more active roles in promoting this initiative in order to get greater acceptance from the major economies, which is partly partly the G7 countries, and we see that during this 4 years, beginning last year, starting last year, we have developing countries in the presidency of the G20 process, and this can be a good momentum to proceed with the concrete actions of reforms for the multilateral development bank and other international financial institutions. The last point that I like to make is to use more or to elevate the role of T20 in collaborations also with T7 in order to come up with innovative ideas and also to communicate these ideas into commitment and actions under G20. With that points, I like to end my presentations. Give back to you, Yudo. Thank you.
Thank you, Yose, for presentation of the paper. I think Yose already touched a couple important points. First, regarding the challenges, I think on the structure or in terms of the governance, Yose talks about the dominance of wealth countries in Bretton Woods system or international financial institutions. And the second challenge that he raised also about the diverse financing requirement. And we heard from Pak Dede's story this morning about Janet Yellen mentions that Bretton Woods system was designed mainly to address economic and monetary problems, but not to address current challenges, for instance, like health issue, climate change, and so on and so forth. Another third challenge that Yose and colleagues raise is about the debt credit rating and also private sector, in particular about lower sovereign ratings result in higher borrowing costs for developing countries. Meanwhile, they have a limited fiscal capacity. And I think the proposal is also interesting, expediting the reform process, which is already agreed by G20 countries, and decoupling lending decision from sovereign ratings. The third one is about the innovative financing tools. And I think the last one is also important about promoting regional perspectives, given that perhaps one policy fits all is not really working in the current dynamics. Now, I would like to invite John to give some perspective on this paper. John is joining us from Toronto in the very early morning. Thank you very much, John. And let me introduce briefly John. John Kirton is the director at the G7 Research Group and also G20 Research Group. I think your position is quite unique, John. I mean, like connecting between this G20 and G7, and Yose also mentioned about the needs for the close collaboration between this G20 and G7. And also T20 and T7, and also given that G7 countries basically dominate, the governance of the current international financial institutions. So without much further ado, John, time is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you from this part of the world. Due disclosure, we also have a BRICS research group, even though the C doesn't stand for Canada in the BRICS. I've been involved with the Think 20 since the start in 2012, and I'm currently serving as the co-chair of the sister task force. That's number 4. That's the one on climate change. Let me start with the first question we were asked to address, the need to improve the agility of the IFIs to respond swiftly during the crisis. And the answer, the need is immediate, intense, and even existential, given the climate crisis we now confront. And this policy brief, in its written version, properly puts the climate crisis, its words as well as mine, at the center of its analysis and recommendations. So everyone should actually read the brief. The G20 leaders must make the international financial institutions do this. Since we know that the IFIs cannot reform themselves in the right way in time to control the climate crisis, or indeed the other ones we've lived through since 2008. Everyone, I think, should recall their failure to reform themselves for the long overdue voice and vote reform, or chairs and shares. They needed the G20 to agree to do this for the IMF at the Seoul Summit in 2010, and for the World Bank's paid-in capital of increase of a mere $7.5 billion in April 2018. Perhaps more encouraging, G20 leaders made the IFIs and the MDBs reform themselves in other ways. This was most notably, and I think more centrally to our concerns, through new allocations of special drawing rights at the International Monetary Fund in response to the most recent global crises. $250 billion in new SDRs for the financial crisis in 2009, and then boom, up to $650 billion for the COVID crisis in 2021. And the climate crisis now is much bigger and will last much longer. So you can do the math and see the range of what we might expect the G20 to be able to do. So we need the G20 summit to act now for the climate crisis. And by now, I mean at the Delhi summit. Big, bold action, building on what they've already agreed to do at their summits, what they've already implemented. And here, one fact, since the start, the summits have made 134 commitments on international financial institutional reform. Not one of those commitments has made any reference to climate change. So we have to think a little more creatively about how we get the job done we need to do at Delhi. Thank you. Come back to the other questions when they arise.
Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, I think John emphasized again the need to speed up and the need for G20 to push about this IFIs reform agenda. Now let me move to the next panel. Sandra Paulsen is the coordinator Institute for Applied Economic Research. She's from Brazil. And I think it's interesting to hear perhaps from Brazil perspective, given this the role Brazil is in BRICS or even in G20 and how this Brazil views regarding about this international financial institution reform. Sandra, time is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this very enriching event that we have had here in Bali. And the issue that we have been discussing is the reassessment of the global financial order and the need to reorient the international financial institutions for meeting emerging development financing challenges that we all have, since it's a global problem. So we are talking about sustainable finance for development, and it's getting more and more clear with the emergence of the climate crisis now, that that idea that we economists have always had, that for one goal, one instrument, is not really working for climate change. Only carbon pricing doesn't seem to do the job about stopping climate change. So to meet the needs for the Paris Agreement, the targets for the Paris Agreement, it's clear that a huge investment effort is required in each and every country to transition to this low carbon economy. And even if we take into consideration the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, we cannot deny the fact that we all contribute to emissions, carbon emissions, and especially in Brazil, we've been one of the contributors. And the country is really preparing for this challenge of fighting climate change, adopting a systemic approach in the line of this big push for sustainability that has been proposed by the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. So a few days ago, in the National Social and Economic Development Bank in Brazil, in Rio, this document was presented, just discussing the possibilities for financing this big push that is needed. And Brazil, even if Brazil is a very big economy, it's still a developing economy, and its example might serve other colleagues in both the BRICS and the G20 groups. So at that event at the BNDES, officials from the government announced what is being called a social and ecological transition for Brazil, an initiative that Brazil is taking in 6 areas. like with the view of a new industrialization process with social well-being to meet the SDG targets in this new national development project. So this project includes a low carbon and highly competitive agriculture, a view of new industrialization with efforts to incorporate new technology, and the digitalization and to modernize the service sector also as an important generator of employment and for increasing income for the most vulnerable population. So to face climate change, the Brazilian government has promoted changes both in the public administration, acknowledging the nature of the challenge as transversal. So there are new units dealing with environmental and sustainability problems in not less than 19 ministries. And before these last 4 years, Brazil used to be a leader in fighting deforestation and in protecting its rich biomes and the Amazon in particular. This Brazilian leadership was undermined in the last few years, but as the new president says, Brazil is back now, and we now see the social and ecological transition as a great development opportunity for the country in areas such technology to advance and consolidate the productive sector, energy transition, increasing the share of renewables in our energy mix, the circular economy with efforts in sanitation and solutions for waste treatment, that is, these efforts are long due. New infrastructure, now with a view of building green infrastructure, a new way of seeing this development process, and also putting some emphasis on the bioeconomy. And in spite of the size of its economy, Brazil, due to constraints in terms of fiscal space, it's obvious that the public budget alone is not enough to finance this transition that is required for climate change. So we have to attract foreign investment. We have to search for financing from multilateral institutions. We have to get finance from the private sector. We have to move the development banking system to come up with the credit needed. And for all these, the idea of sustainable finance, in the sense of a sustainable finance to finance the SDGs, to finance the sustainable development goals that have been established by Agenda 2030 and that we all have agreed upon, it's definitely needed. And that's why the policy briefing that we are issuing now, that you have written, is so important, because there is no way this finance will be enough for all these efforts that all our countries have to do with the current situation in the international financial system. So Brazil is trying alternatives, also planning to issue green bonds in the second half of the year, following the example of Chile. And we are also working in regulation for the carbon market as another initiative. But and in order to assure investors about where the resources will be used, of course, Brazil is preparing also some kind of taxonomy for sustainable finance, following the examples of Colombia or Mexico. But the view now is that to preserve biomes and to build green infrastructure, and to doing this, also being socially inclusive, dealing with poverty, dealing with the need that our population has for social services, education, food, social protection, health services. Of course, all these increase in employment and income, all these will require a huge effort in financing. And that's where we all have to go, dealing with this need for financing and giving incentives to our development, using our resources and giving more power to our biodiversity and to our natural capital to play a role in this new development process. So it's been shown in studies in Brazil that recovering forests, for example, and working in horticulture for urban areas are examples of ways to create new jobs, decreasing poverty, and still like being climate friendly and biodiversity friendly. So these are the areas where we have to advance. And for this, we really need to get the financing needed. And that has been promised under the SDG 17 and for many, many years. Of course, there are talks about we need to do our job also, but that's what we are doing. And we are expecting the situation to change so that we all can get the resources that are definitely so needed for this effort. I think I leave it like this now and wait for discussion or questions.
Thank you, Sandra. I think Sandra highlights very interesting, innovative projects and initiatives from Brazil regarding about these sustainability issues, climate change, and biodiversity. And I want to dig deeper on that area because Brazil is among few countries that is quite leader in this area. But if I may, let me go back to you, John. I think you mentioned about the need, the requirement of huge resources to support these international financial institutions. But the question that has been surrounding with us is about how we can get the money. I mean, like to enhance these development projects, because I think it's really hard to ask again the wealthy countries to support in terms of the funding. Another idea that is discussed in this morning by Pak Khatib Basri is about the balance sheet optimization. So basically look at on the balance sheet of these international financial institutions, and we focus on the very pressing issues. So any thought on that area, John, about this, how we can enhance this financial development financing, given that the very limited resources from the developed countries?
Sure. We need more money, and we need lots more money. And we did, to control the crises we all faced, the poor most of all, in 2009 and again in 2020, the global financial crisis, the COVID crisis. So how much do we need now for the climate crisis? The UN says $5 to $7 trillion a year. There's good detailed figures in the policy brief. Another reason to read it. Amar earlier today said 3 trillion, 2 of it from a domestic resource mobilization, but 1 trillion internationally. So if we're in that range, it's pretty clear to me where the money will come from. First, it's going to be public money. Yes, private finance, blended finance can help, but all of the G20 commitments that say that, it's really passing the buck. I mean, they wait for the private sector to come through, say, oh, we've done our share. No, we need public money. And here we have to remember what the G20 summits have done before. London in April, this is for the financial crisis, They raised $1.1 trillion on the spot. If London can do it then, why can't Delhi do that now? Las Cabas, 2012, to stop the European financial crisis, they raised $500 billion in a new firewall fund without the United States providing a dime. So we don't need the US. And in both cases, it worked. So we should note that in doing these things, the G20 summits relied on the IFIs and the MDBs. For the London package, about a quarter of it, $250 billion, was a new allegation of IMF special drawing rights. And more recently, for the COVID crisis, they have created G20 summits, new instruments, new institutions, a new pandemic fund at the World Bank, and of course, a new joint finance and health ministers meeting within the G20. So now, if you'll give me another minute or two, they should do 6 things at Delhi. 1, they should keep their past promises by ending fossil fuel subsidies, by giving $100 billion a year to developing countries for climate finance, and by doubling climate finance for adaptation. And that means the MDBs and IFIs should stop financing recipients who continue to subsidize fossil fuel, and they should stop financing new unabated coal, oil, and even gas projects. 2, they should raise the World Bank's climate finance to $100 billion this year. Last year, they doubled it to reach 32 billion, and that was before the climate crisis we all know we're in now. 3, they should channel more SDRs from G20 developed to developing and low-income countries, and they should do so through the IMF's new G20 mandated Resilience and Sustainability Trust, rather than the old traditionally focused Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. The new one focuses on climate change. The old one still does not. 4th, they should improve MDB's capital adequacy by doing the 5 specific things recommended by the G20 created independent experts. You'll recall that these are refining risk appetite, then incorporating callable capital, a lot cheaper than paid-in stuff, strengthening lending room, yes, addressing credit rating agency methodologies. That was critical to the G20 at its first summit, right? The financial crisis. And finally, improving governance frameworks. 5th on my list, they should issue SDR bonds from the multilateral development banks. And several leading economists have recommended that, but it's already been done. The World Bank has done this already on a smaller scale. The International Development Association, for the poorest of the poor, issued 26 billion, right? So why not the others doing much more? And finally, but most contentiously, they should authorize another round of SDRs, a new SDR for SDG allocation, I call it, with SDG 13 at the core. They've done it twice before, so they can do it again to confront the more serious climate crisis we now face. And if anybody doubts what I say about the climate crisis, let me just remind you one fact. Yesterday, our friends in New York City, where the American turned global financial crisis began, didn't have a financial crisis. They suddenly soared to be the second most polluted city in the world after Delhi, because of the forest fire smoke coming in from Canada. And it was created there and came into the USA because of climate change. So our American friends get it as we speak. It's in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for these 6 proposals. Really interesting, and also I think you highlight a really important point about the problem to come up with consensus in the, for instance, like in the G20 level is about we rarely find the common denominator, and with the issue with this climate change and also on the pandemic, you mentioned about the New York City get troubles with smoke from kind of the forest fire, then they realize the importance of this issue. So John, one thing that perhaps I'd like you to comment on one of these issue raised by Yose's and colleagues paper about to separate about this lending decision and sovereign ratings. Do you think this is something that can be feasible in, I mean, like, do you think that this is promising in the sense that will be attracted, but will be attracting let's say investors or capital market, given that there are some issues as well that discussed in this morning? John, any comments on that? I think you are still mute.
Was that to Sandra or to me?
You. I still ask you, John, because we have to relate with Yose's proposal about separating the lending decisions from the sovereign ratings, credit ratings.
I think he's right on that one. Look, the credit rating agencies, which are far from flawed institutions as a class and kind, we knew that at the Washington summit, the very first one, right? They helped cause the American turned global financial crisis. They live and die with a focus on the private sector, which of course is beholden to reporting quarterly to their shareholders, whereas politicians, yes, they tend to have, at least in the democratic countries, maybe a 4-year time horizons, but that's a lot better than 3. So why public institutions trying to provide a public good, the IFIs and the MDBs, should become enslaved to the private sector logic enforced by the credit rating agencies makes no sense at all. The reason, of course, is because the IFIs and MBDs argue, and it's a good argument, that they need to keep their AAAs, right, in order to borrow capital at low cost to finance the poor countries, right?
Yeah.
At lower rates than those poorer countries would get if they just rang up Goldman Sachs and borrowed it directly. And yes, they need to be able to loan to the IDA's clients at 0 interest rates. But if the G20 governments provided the financial resources, much more of them, more directly, starting with callable capital, right? You could, I think, reduce the constraints of the reliance on those credit rating agencies. Ideally, you could get all the very bright economists. I think they've got 13,000, maybe 16,000 tax-free salaried folks working in Washington, D.C. to come up with a credit rating agency that's tailored for lending for public goods by public institutions. And that's the one that governments, right, should follow when they decide how much to give and who to give it for. Yes, we could spend a lot of time going into the important details and fine prints of moving to that alternative model, but we don't have the time. And the other thing I'd say is at the start of my list is actually stop spending the money you've got on stupid things, fossil fuel subsidies, right? And save that money. And boy, the treasuries of the world could use it for climate finance without the credit rating agencies being involved at all.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Let me go to Sandra. In Yose's paper, he raised a really interesting point about promoting, encouraging regional perspective. And you mentioned about very interesting initiatives from Brazil in, you know, like finding or even like promoting like innovative financing tools in various areas, particularly on the climate change. And related with that, I wonder whether like these initiatives probably can be scaled up, perhaps at the regional level, for instance, in Latin America, or some sort of even like Asian countries like Indonesia could learn from what you have done in Brazil. Please, Sandra.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Teguh. I think it's very important that Brazil works together with the other Amazon countries. So we have, I think we're going to have a meeting now in June or July with the other countries from the Amazon basin. So we discuss joint projects and joint plans for the region with Bolivia and Colombia, Venezuela, etc., etc. So, of course, it's very important that we get in touch with our neighbors, first of all, and we are working very closely through the UN Economic Commission with Argentina, Uruguay, Chile. The example of energy transition that Uruguay has made in the last few years is really an example for us. So we are following very closely what they are doing. But of course, Brazil has similarities with Indonesia, with India, even South Africa. We've been talking about it. And it would be, of course, very enriching and positive if we could get to learn from each other in these initiatives. And Brazil is very open to discuss with our companions, both at BRICS and at G20 and IFIs, what we can do together to like multiply the effect of our actions if we can get others to join us. So it's very positive that we have all these instances to collaborate, especially BRICS, and now with the G20 we've been in touch. That's why I'm here in Indonesia, to get closer to you and talk to you and learn from your experience as a G20 leader. And then we have the Indian example right now, and then comes Brazil, and then will be South Africa. And I think we have to take the opportunity that we are 4 countries from the global South getting these strategic place right now, that we, in all means, we have to get together and multiply the effect of our actions by joining our efforts. That's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. So before I open questions to our colleagues joining us online, I'd like to invite Yose. Perhaps you have some comments on issues raised by John and Sandra.
Yeah, I think thank you very much to John and Sandra for the very valuable comments, and I think John's put a very interesting points in his earlier remark that G20 actually can be very effective in promoting these efforts by citing several examples in the past, and now it depends on how we ensure that the G20 would like also to take up this agenda of reforming the international financial institutions to another level. To accelerate the reforms and to also redirecting the international financial institutions towards the current challenges, or to respond to the current challenges that we have, and I think the role of the as Sandra also already emphasized, just emphasized in her comment, that the four countries of the global south really strategically place in doing so, in trying to push for this reform agenda. So hopefully the G20 leaders would also come up with a strong action or strong recommendations to the multilateral development banks in conducting the reform. Yeah.
Thank you, Yose. Let me read a couple of questions from the online participants. One is from Dandi. This is for you, John. So, given the commitment on MDB's reform in the G7 leaders' statement last May, what are the shared interests between G7 and G20 to move the agenda forward? And this is important for T20 India in identifying common ground in this issue. So the upcoming T20 communique will have political backup or support from both G7 and G20. John, please.
Well, first, as I think I tried to suggest at the beginning, we don't have time to wait for the chairs and chairs, because that is instantly caught up with, I mean, the tough thing so far has been, how do you slice it so Japan doesn't have to give too much up to China, right? So it's about status, and it's the ultimate zero-sum game. Whereas all of the IFI and MDB reforms I've suggested, it's about real money right here, right now. And at the moment, we have a new president, as was mentioned, of the IMF. So we could say, oh, it's terrible. No Indian or a Canadian or Indonesian could even apply for the top job because you have to be born in the USA, or at least an American citizen, right? But the one we've got now, well, also has another heritage, and he deeply believes in climate change, right? The climate and development agenda, he said again and again, they're the same thing. You can't have one without the other. So I think we need to have him focus his entire energies on doing that job, right? And not get bogged down in the trench warfare of chairs and shares. And there are many other things we can think of the G20 doing to meet the clear and present danger. I've got more later on the list, but if I've heard your question correctly, I think I've given you a very clear answer to where I think we should go. And just one other thought about all those Congress people in Washington, right?
Mhm.
Who we might need if we want to do anything that requires the advice and consent of the Senate of the United States. But if you go back to the COVID crisis, right?
Mhm.
It was the former president with his party, right? That with the collective leadership of the G20 did a lot of good things, including in mobilizing money, right? For the COVID crisis. So we're in vastly better shape now because we've got not just the right president of the World Bank, but we've got the right president of the United States. So that's what, as a political scientist who deeply believes in realistic recommendations, that's what I would highlight now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to push a little bit about this climate change issues and also financing related with this one, because there is one question from Novia about the country-based platform for climate financing is now gaining more traction. So for instance, like JETP in the case of Indonesia and also South Africa. Now, how to make these IFIs more like reorientation helps and works to make this platform not one size fit all. So perhaps Sandra, you can give a little bit flavor on these questions about how this reorientation, like create platform, but not one size fits all regarding this climate financing. Please, Sandra, any comments?
Yeah, if I understood your question right,
Yeah.
Of course, one size fits all is not exactly what we need, because every country has its own needs and its own demands. But I think what is important is that there is a framework that allows all of our countries to take the initiatives that are needed or that are being pressured upon. But we cannot do it with our own resources. That's not the case. So if we have to deliver in these areas, and we are interested in delivering, what we need is that on the other side, we also get the support that is required. So either Brazil or India or Indonesia or Chile or Argentina or South Africa, all of our countries, we need to have this urgent help. There is no time, as John says, when the pressing issues are there. They have come up with ways of financing what is required. So it's time now for taking the decisions.
Agree, Sandra. Thank you for.
If I may add, Yudo.
Yeah.
There are many things that the IFIs, especially the MDB, that can also contribute in this scheme, and this is actually one of the few innovative schemes that already that has been tried to afford the energy transitions, although we haven't really seen the result yet. But the MDBs actually can provide at least one thing, several things actually, like for example, the institutional aspect or the administrations of this country platform, because many MDBs actually have the mechanisms in order to carry out that kind of project. So, like for a JETP, for example, JETP in Indonesia has been assisted a lot by the ASEAN Development Bank, and ASEAN and other MDBs can also take part in realizing or in implementing that kind of project and programs. Another thing that MDB can provide, actually try to push even more by providing more financing in order to amplify the result or the funding that makes available to this country platforms programs. So, like for example, for JETP, maybe the MDB can also even amplify it or add and invite private investors in order to complement the funding available. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Yose. So let me read one question from Arun, and I think this is a delicate issues as well. He asked about, there is a strong opposition in even developed countries to increases in climate spending, and there are concerns about this value for money proposition, and also criticism regarding lack of transparency in funding green projects. And there are also views that if international financial institution, this is related with your point, John, back out of funding fossil fuel projects, this could leave space for influential global powers with vested interest to fill that space. And given these polarized geopolitical situations, Arun asked about what should India's G20 presidents do to give a political push to international financial institution reforms in an expedited manner. Also, now that more funds are flowing to climate mitigation than adaptation, how to ensure that both funds get equal fundings. So please, perhaps John or Sandra or Yose can comment on this. John,
I'll start off if you want. Yeah, we've got a big problem with ESG trustworthiness, a big problem with greenwashing. So how would we address this in the G20 context? What we need, the bank and the fund to begin with and work out from there, is every time they use financing for, they call it green growth, green other things, but we want it to be genuinely a green. And even though the IMF is on a crash hiring spree for basically its climate economists, not ecologists, you have to be an economist really to get a job at the IMF. In the global governance architecture, the people who really know about that are from half a dozen or more of the world's major multilateral organizations. You could start with the WMO from the 40s, UN Climate, UN Biodiversity, UN Desertification from 92, with the Green Climate Fund, for example, even the International Solar Alliance, right? So things should be done jointly with the IFI, MDBs, and for this particular purpose, you need an international environmental organization there to just certify it's done in a genuinely green way. And then how would you design that in from the top at the next G20 summit? Look, Mr. Modi, you can make history by being the first G20 leader who invited as a guest to your summit the head of Well, my first pick would be Achim Steiner, because he oversees the SDGs, including 13, but the head of a major multilateral environmental organization. The International Solar Alliance is a good baby step, but it's not enough. Never before has a G20 summit invited one of those. Why not now? And oh, by the way, I don't have time to elaborate, but why not the head of the G20 created global infrastructure hub, a key part of the policy brief? I think Marie Lamfrendo, well, I think she has a Brazilian connection, right? But she might say, hey guys, why don't we think about doing for your global infrastructure hub what we did before to create the financial stability aboard, make it a major multilateral organization, change the mandate, make it a global sustainable infrastructure hub, and give it a funding capacity of its own, not just once it's prepared the projects, another question, right? But provide seed funding at least for them. So there's a lot to do at Delhi, right, to get to overcoming this complete imbalance. Always economists, never ecologists, right? Thanks.
Thank you, John. Sandra, perhaps you want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree with John that it would be great if we could expand the audience of these meetings by including other people that could give more confidence to the public about the environmental green side of the different initiatives. At the same time, I think it's important that we work on this transparency issue. So Brazil is going to be the president of G20 next year. And last week we have met the 3 presidents for the 3 think tanks that are going to organize the T20 in Brazil. And we met, we formalized the agreement, and we are going to soon publish an article explaining what is it that we are supposed to do in organizing the T20, and also explaining what kind of structure we are thinking about the organization, and how we are going to include the different think tanks from different countries, especially from the Troika. So I think it's very important that we work in this transparency issue that John has picked. And of course, it would be great if we could have people from Conservation International, World Wildlife Fund, and I don't know which other. Brazil has very many very important environmental organizations that are working with the science of environment, and not only with the activism, but also with scientific advocacy, one could say. I think it's very important that we include all these point of views. And coming from a background of environmental economics, I wrote my PhD thesis with 4 ecologists. So I think that's the best way to do the work, to do our job, is to open our minds and work with these people that are bringing the scientific information, so we really get to understand what is the problem that we are dealing with. And today, early morning, I asked also during our panel about the importance of biodiversity, because as I learned in school, in graduate school, biodiversity goes together with climate change in the sense that it's not only different species that we are caring for because of their charisma, but it's about small bricks that build the wall of resilience where we can base all of our human activities on the planet. And as long as we forget about biodiversity and only go for climate change, we really have to work hand in hand, because it's biodiversity who helps us build the resilience to adapt and to help us overcome the consequences of the climate changes that are already on their way. So I think there is a lot of work to do in also convincing finance ministries and economic authorities about the importance to listen to ecologists, as John said.
Thank you, Sandra. Yose, want to make some thoughts, sirs?
I think I'm all right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think we are about to close to our session. So before I conclude the panel, I'd like to invite all panelists perhaps to share their final thoughts for this T20 and also the G20 India. Please, I'd like to start from Yose, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes. I think T20 has a very strategic roles in pursuing or in pushing this agenda specifically because the reforms of international financial institution has been around for quite a while. The idea has been thrown several times in many issues, but G20 need to come up with a concrete roadmap for this agenda, and I believe T20 along with T7 also can play very important roles in to push even further for this idea. To keep the momentum during the for developing countries chairmanship or presidency in this in G20. Yeah.
Thank you, Yose. John?
Yeah, I think all of my recommendations come in two categories. One is G20 leaders, keep your promises. Do what you've already committed to do at the summits. The second are do again for this crisis what you've already done before for the previous ones, the financial crisis and the COVID crisis. So in that latter category, let me offer just two more. One's easy. They just created for the COVID crisis a new G20 institution, a joint health and finance ministers forum. Do it again by creating one for the climate environment ministers and the finance one. So you've got built in at that level of the architecture, the synergies we need. And we do know that the ministerials do help compliance with the leaders' commitments on the same subject. So there's evidence behind that one. The second one, and I'll end with this, Mr. Modi, after Delhi, before your year is done, or working together with the incoming host immediately, call a second special summit to deal with the climate crisis in the context of SDG 13. Look, when we started with the global financial crisis, the G20 leaders, they met twice a year, right? It worked. The crisis was controlled. Then they went into semi-retirement and only met one time a year until the next crisis popped up. That was COVID. So in the Rome year, they actually met 3 times a year. Yeah, the regular Rome one, but a special one on health and another special one on, well, Afghanistan, right? But it was the health one. Last year, they didn't meet again, apart from Bali for understandable reasons. They were blindsided by the war in Ukraine. But now, well, it's quite possible for Mr. Modi. Oh, yes, working with Mr. Lula. And we know we can count on him. He's been there. He's done it. There's a ton of evidence. And if you think that the pathway to what we tend to call climate change is really what, even on Task Force 4, we call clean energy, look at where Brazil's energy comes from, right? So let's have a second summit on clean energy, jointly called and chaired by the outgoing president, Mr. Modi, and the incoming one, Mr. Lula. I think they're both from what some would regard as the genuine global South. So there's a thought.
Thank you, John. Sandra?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress the fact that in Brazil, we are very conscious about the fact that the people in the Amazon is not a desert. Like there are over 25 million people living there. And these people, especially indigenous people, are the ones that have been preserving the forest and the biodiversity we are all famous for. So we have to find alternatives for development for these people too. And that's why we are talking about bioeconomy so much right now, because these people, their health, their well-being is important. We cannot continue mining in their protected areas. We cannot continue allowing for deforestation in the Amazon. So these are the big questions that the government has to deal with right now. So it's end of hunger, end of poverty, and really working for the well-being of the most vulnerable population in Brazil. And there is no way for us to go forward if we don't get the attention for these issues of both climate change and the need to preserve biodiversity. So let's hope that we get the support for doing this and that we can do our homework well also. So that's the hope for the future.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. So I think we can conclude our session today. There are many interesting proposals from Yose's paper and also sharing thought from John, from Sandra that I think can be brought for the G20 India presidency. So thank you again all for the panelists. Thank you, John, for joining in the early morning from Toronto. Thank you, Sandra, Yose. And let us give applause to our great panelists. Unfortunately, this is online. Thank you. I think we can conclude now.
Thank you, Yudo, for very good chairing the session.
Thank you, Yose.
Thank you for promoting this side event. It's been really a great opportunity for learning and for getting in touch with your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you. So
thank you, John.
thank you.